Welcome to Unlock Financial Independence, the #1 financial independence podcast for physical therapists. I am your host, Matt McClanahan. Welcome back, my financially savvy physios. I am your host, Matt McClanahan, here from an extended break from the podcast. And I want to say thank you for joining me for another episode of the podcast, where I help PTs just like you unlock your path to financial freedom while working as a PT. If you're new to the channel, welcome. And for new and old listeners alike, make sure you join and engage in the Facebook group, Financial Independence for Physical Therapists. Lastly, subscribe to the once per month newsletter, which will be linked in the show notes for monthly tips on things like travel hacking, the state of student loans, listener wins, and more. But on today's show, we're talking about Coast Fi. That's Coast Financial Independence and the Rule of 72. So let's jump into it. If you've been wondering where I've been, I have had a few different life changes going on. I am actually moving out of Austin, Texas here in the next 4 weeks or so. So I'm kind of tying up loose ends and I'm planning on my next moves. I will be most likely getting into travel physical therapy. So if you do travel physical therapy, shoot me a DM on Instagram. Let's chat. I need to know more about travel PT. I know very little, but I've been doing a lot of my research. I do plan on starting that in February. So that means if I move in the next 4 weeks, what am I going to be doing from November 1 until February 1? And honestly, it's just going to be hanging out. So I will just be spending time with family over the holidays. And then I am expecting to be an uncle for the second time starting in January. So just spending time with family during those 3 months. But what kind of got this topic in my brain was the fact that since I will be doing travel physical therapy, what that opens up for me as far as financial independence is concerned. And the concept of Coast Fi was brought up, which I'll get into more in a moment of what that really is. But it's going to allow, I think it's the path I'm going to take because it's going to allow me to reach a certain level of invested assets and then just kind of enjoy life for the rest of those years. So I think to jump in, we're going to take this a little bit backwards. So I want to introduce what's called the Rule of 72 first. So when it comes to investing, we can have a general idea of how long the investment is going to take to double if we take 72 divided by our expected return. Okay. So if we take 72, divide that by 8%, which is a lower than average return in the S&P 500, that gets us 9 years. Okay. So, but more realistically, what it's been returning is about 10%. So 7.2 years. So let's say that you have $100,000 invested. If you put no more money towards that investment, you're not contributing, you're not doing anything of the sort. If you just let it do its thing in the market, then what we can say is that if your average return on that investment is 8%, we would do 72 divided by 8. That number there is 9. So if you have 100,000 in the market, you expect 8% return. In 9 years, we can expect that 100,000 to become 200,000, right? And then in another 9 years, we can expect that 200,000 to become 400,000. So another way to think about that is in 18 years, if all you have is 100,000 and you don't even contribute anything to it, you just let it sit in the market, continue to gain that compounding interest. In 18 years, you can go from having 100,000 to $400,000. And then if you add another to that, so 27 years, then we're looking at 800,000. And then if we go out one more further, 36 years, you're looking at 1.6 million, right? So that's pretty important to know. That's a general concept. It's the rule, I think, rule of thumb of 72. I don't know. I don't know how specific it is. Obviously, the interest rate's or the compounding interest is going to vary, but it's just a general idea so that we can have a direction whenever we're kind of thinking about this. Okay. Great. Now that we know that, that's important to know in order to understand what Coast financial independence is. So, the idea of Coast financial independence is that you can work backwards into finding out what specific number you will need right now in order to, quote, coast into your financial independence. So it's the amount you need to have invested by a specific age to reach your FI number, which we've talked about in previous podcasts, at the age that you want to fully retire. Okay. Of course, I'm going to hit you with an example right now because that is too abstract to really understand. So let's understand what the financial independence number is. Remember, that is how much you'll need in retirement. And I will say it's 40,000. Multiply that by 25, and that gets us $1 million that you'll need in order to be considered financially independent. The reason for that is because of the 4% rule, which then we're going to be able to draw down 4% from those assets of that $1 million every single year in order to pay for everything that we're doing throughout our life, that $40,000 that we said we're going to need. Okay. So let's give an example of Coast financial independence. Let's say, I'm going to try to give a pretty realistic example. So a new grad living in Austin, Texas, let's say that they're 25 years old and they're making 70,000 right out of school. Okay. If their financial independence number, the money they need in order to draw down on their assets to live every single year, if we say that that is $40,000 a year, then they will multiply that by 25 and they need $1 million. Okay. So we know that their financial independence number is $1 million. Let's just assume that they want to have a traditional retirement. So 65 years old. And we're also going to say that they're investing $1,000 a month towards retirement, $12,000 a year. I think that with a 401k, especially if you have a match, plus adding in a little bit extra to get you to that $1,000 per month, I think is incredibly reasonable and honestly somewhat conservative, to be honest, with this investment approach. So I think it's very approachable with what's reasonable in this retirement strategy here. Okay. Now, what we're going to do is I mentioned the assumptions on what our investments will grow at, and let's assume an 8% growth. The market has been returning 10% since I believe the 1970s or earlier. So it wouldn't be out of the question to use 10% in this example, but I want to be ultra conservative so that I provide the most optimism in this approach possible. Because if you can make it in a reasonable amount of time to your Coast-Fi number at 8% and the market's returning 2% higher, all that means is that you're going to reach Coast-Fi sooner in the real scenarios, right? So we're going to assume 8% just to be super conservative in our estimations here. Okay. So if we go to this website, Coast-Fi calculator on walletburst.com, which I will link in the description below, I'm going to plug in all of that information and we're going to get a few different numbers. So let's do this. Let me share my screen. So those that do watch on Spotify, you can kind of check this out. And we are live here. Okay. So let's say that this individual is 25. They want to retire at 65. Their annual spend in retirement will be estimated at 40,000. I'm going to assume the worst case scenario and they have $0 invested. Okay. And now we're also going to assume that $1,000. And then we're going to assume an 8% growth here. Inflation, I'm leaving at 3%. I understand that that might be different right now and things are crazy and we don't know all the uncertainty, but traditionally we're around that. And then the safe withdrawal rate, that comes back to the 4% rule with the 25 multiplying what you need by 25. Okay. So in this scenario here, you can see that in 18 years, this person is 18 years away from being what they consider coast financial independence. And honestly, what that essentially means is that when they hit that, they don't have to contribute any more money towards retirement because they know that when they hit 65, there's a high degree of certainty that they are going to have the amount of money that they said that they would need in retirement. Of course, they can continue to put money towards this, and that will allow them to get there faster, but they don't have to. So let's think about this a little bit differently. They're 25 now. In 18 years, you can watch the graph here. I'll try to speak through this as well. I think I'll be able to talk through this. At 43 years old, their net worth will be $341,000. 342. Let's round up on that. Okay. Their financial independence number is actually $1 million. Now, the graph here is going to continue, and you can see the dotted line. That's going to be if they continue to contribute to their retirement after they've hit Coast Fi. They would reach true financial independence 7 years earlier if all they do is keep up that $1,000 a month of contributions, right? But if they don't, they'll still get there at 65 years old. Okay. So they would need, if they were in this scenario today, with this number here, Coast Fi number at current age, if they had, say their parents gifted them $142,000, you can see on this, it says Coast Fi number at current age, $142,000. All that means is that this current invested assets, I put 0 there. If somehow this individual had some savings or their parents were giving them a one-time gift of whatever, 50,000, that would go towards this number. Okay. So let's actually do that for hypothetical sake. Let's say that your parents were able to give you, I don't know, $20,000 for graduating PT school. That's the only difference we did here. And that moved their timeline of Coast Fi from 43 to 39. Okay. So it shaved 4 years off of their financial independence goal, right? Now let's actually just plug in this 142,000 that our calculator is telling us here that they need for Coast financial independence. So instead of saying they only have 20,000 invested, they have all $142,000. According to this graph, they could do nothing more and they will make it to their financial independence number by age 65. Pretty cool. Now, I know a lot of this is a little bit more abstract, so you don't know what the scenario is fully going to be. You have student loans, all these different things kind of rattle in the brain a little bit. But in a realistic scenario, let's go back down to 0 invested here. In a realistic scenario, the idea of this whole podcast is that I want to provide optimism that you can be a new grad. You can make a reasonable amount of money from being a PT, invest a somewhat reasonable amount every single month, and you can still get to retirement with a good chunk of change that is going to sustain you for 30 years, according to the Trinity study, which I've talked about in the other podcast, right? So the big thing here is that a lot of people will say that you know you're going to need 10 million or whatever, however much you make in your salary, that's what you'll need. There's probably another podcast I'll do about that, but realistically, the older you get, the less money you start to actually spend. So that's why I put $40,000 in retirement. Some people are going to say that's super unrealistic. I have a house, all these different scenarios. But ultimately that comes down to what you want, right? I can't provide every single scenario on this one single podcast here, but I wanted to provide a scenario that I do think is realistic. Okay. So what I now want to do is I want to show you what my specific plan is. Let's actually, so that I think my example I gave is incredibly realistic for a lot of people, but I want to share maybe my exact scenario that I'm going to be doing here. Okay. So I'm going to be doing travel PT, and let me plug in some numbers on this calculator and pull it up for you here. So I am 32 soon. My retirement age, I want to actually be done by 60. Okay. My annual spending, I'm going to leave it at 40,000. I'm going to assume I have $0 invested. And my monthly contribution, what I want to do here is kind of see, let's put in the average weekly take home for some of the jobs I'm seeing is about 22,500 after tax. Okay. Let me go ahead and share my screen here again. All right. So what you can see here is that I'm 32 years old. As I come along here, if I'm investing a quarter, so 25% of my take home pay every single month, because this is a paid out weekly for travel PTs, that if I am able to do that, I will eventually hit my Coast financial independence number at what this says here is 45 years old, right? So from 32 to 45, so about 13 years until I'm Coast financial independence. Now, for a more granular perspective about me, I do in this time frame plan on purchasing a house, which then I will house hack, rent out half of it, hopefully reducing my monthly expense, my largest expense of rent down to hopefully zero at the bare minimum. But at a most positive scenario would be that I make money owning the house and renting part of it out. So I do expect that this timeline here, right? I wanted to give a most conservative approach, would actually move to the left on the graph here. One other thing is if I just go from 8%, I'll get there at 45 years. Now, if we say the market returns 10%, I get there in 6 years sooner. So from 32 to 39 is when I hit Coast Fi. So that's only 2% more on return. And I got there 6 years sooner. That is truly insane, guys. So that's the power of compounding interest. And that's why it's so important for you to try to start investing while you're young, especially you guys that just are listening to this podcast that just got out of PT school. Please start investing while you're young. It's going to pay off dividends for you. Okay. Awesome. So I think from here, I just want to kind of know like your guys' thoughts. What do you think of Coast financial independence? Does it freak you out? Does it worry you? Is it unrealistic? Do you think it's going to provide you some freedom earlier on than you were truly expecting? I want to know. Shoot me a DM on Instagram, email me, reach out. I want to know what your thoughts are on Coast financial independence. Do you think it's realistic? And if you don't, I want to know why, because I think that providing as many scenarios as possible of different PTs paths in this profession with their goal of trying to achieve financial independence is going to help provide a lot of clarity for people on if this is a profession they can stay in, right? Because one of the big things is we don't make enough. And what's make enough? Does that mean we're not able to engage in the activities outside of work? We're not able to take that trip? That's the point of this podcast. If I can show one person that this profession is worth it and they did it for all the right reasons, they love it and they enjoy it, and they can achieve what's financial independence in it, I think that this whole podcast will be worth it. So let me know. Don't forget, subscribe to the monthly Financial Savvy Physio newsletter where I'll send out travel rewards hacks and financial information specific to PTs. Follow me on Instagram and YouTube, Unlock FI Rehab on all platforms, and join the Financial Independence for Physical Therapists Facebook group to join other physios just like you on their path to financial independence. Until next time, y'all, peace.